The end was ugly and quick. In an ironic twist, he was the one who looked strangely dignified, while his taunting executioners appeared sadistic. A shaky cell phone video, the final testament to a man's life. Saddam Hussein had a certain straightforward, brutal efficiency as he propelled himself towards absolute control of Iraq. And he kept that power with the same heavy, often vicious hand. It was a trick he learnt early in life.
Here is a boy who grew up not knowing who his father was, teased by the kids in the village about his mother's reputation. His stepfather was a very sort of abusive man. He was brutally deprived from his childhood. At the age of 9, walking around the village with an iron bar in his hand because the children teased him about his mother's reputation. And he learned an early lesson that a 9-year-old with an iron bar is stronger than a teenager.
It was this kind of ruthless force that stuck with Saddam, and over time, it was a skill he perfected.
Like a lot of dictators, you know, I presume Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin would have been the same. They had a certain charisma, as neither they were, but a certain something which got them to the top. But I was very well aware, when I saw him, of course, of his record as a dictator and an utterly ruthless man. But then a lot of people who get to the top are ruthless.
Saddam's Sunni-dominated Ba'ath Party took control in Iraq in 1968. And at just 31, he became the country's second most powerful man, next to President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr. Still little known outside Iraq, Saddam was quick to make an impression when he had the chance.
Someone came and said to me in Arabic, Mr. Deputy would like to invite the British generous delegations to his table. And there was a very well-groomed, very charming gentleman sitting there, invited us, and he was smoking a foot-long cigar. And he asked us in not very good English, but understandable English, what would we like, gentlemen, to drink? And I said, what are you offering? And he said, how about the Iraqi national drink? And we said, oh, fantastic, yes. It turned out to be Johnny Walker Black Label whiskey. He was a very good drinker.
You spent time with your family?
But Saddam didn't just adopt Western drinking styles. He also adopted Western movie stars as his heroes.
It was Godfather Part 1, and that was his favorite film. And he must have spent about an hour giving this analysis of what he thought of the film, the whole symbolic thing. In fact, every time I meet him or every time I looked at his politics, I think it goes back to that impression he had, or the film, the impression the film had on him.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
With Saddam as the power behind the throne, the early 1970s was a period of rapid modernization in Iraq. It was the first major oil boom, and the dramatic rise in oil prices meant benefits for Iraq's infrastructure and its social system, and Saddam was the person who got the credit.
One has to understand that Saddam, for all his terrible faults, did have a vision for Iraq. He set it out in many speeches and indeed in books. And his vision of Iraq was that it should be a major player, not only in the region, but on the world scene. And he had the means to achieve that end. Enormous oil wealth, well-educated, well-motivated people. And he undoubtedly did a lot of things for the benefit of the people. He brought things that we accept as normal, education, health, water, electricity, to the most remote corners of the country, where previously these things simply did not exist. There were many parts of Iraq that were extremely primitive. So there were benefits, and people, provided that they didn't seek to oppose him and just kept their heads down and got on with their lives, had a reasonable way of life.
definitely in the case of Iraq, Saddam gave us a lot of things. There were the development of the country, of the city particularly. There were always cars and gifts and all of these things being given. But I think what he took away from us in the meantime was actually our very souls. We got into a stage where we were fearing each other, where husbands and wives do not talk to each other, where parents are afraid to express anything in front of their kids because the teachers often ask the kids, what does your daddy think of Uncle Saddam and what does your mommy think of Uncle Saddam? And there are horror stories of parents being executed because of the child.
In this climate of fear, Saddam oversaw the killings of some of his own people.
The second time we met him was actually well into the mid-70s, and he was already by that time, I think, the deputy chairman of the ruling party, deputy chairman of the Revolutionary Council, and he was leading the war against the Kurds. It was quite brutal, and obviously, again, for us journalists, we were sort of neutral there, but it still was difficult for us to accept how can a government-led campaign be that brutal and that inhumane and that destructive.
Saddam wasn't interested in being second in command forever, and by 1979 he'd forced President Hassan al-Bakr to resign, and then he took aim at anyone he saw as a threat. Dozens of Ba'athist officials were singled out by Saddam at a party conference in Baghdad. Some were in the room at the time, and despite their pleas for mercy, were led out and immediately executed. It was vicious, swift and methodical, and Saddam had it all filmed for distribution across the Arab world. As his power increased, so his personality cult grew.
Every single Iraqi child was taught to call him Ammo or uncle. We sang for him, we danced for him, we wrote poetry for him, we painted for him in school. That was our training. I saw him as just Uncle Saddam, and I saw him throughout my teenage life as the brutal dictator that committed so many crimes against so many people in Iraq. And it was a parallel scene that I had to survive with and adjust with. And one of the survival skills that my mom taught me is that I have to smile when he smiled, I have to cry when he cried, I have to watch every single feeling I have and not express it, because as my mother said, he knows how to read eyes.
The 1980s were marked by the Iran-Iraq War. Saddam was encouraged and supported by the United States.
The man was a cruel dictator, came to power by force, he killed many people. But the thing that has been avoided is the links that he had with the United States. There are pictures of him in Rumsfeld, I think, aren't there? And the Americans armed him, backed him when the Shah was overthrown. And it was totally cynical, the American attitude.
Along with the United States, much of the Arab world sided with Iraq in a war that had no winner. It left hundreds of thousands dead on both sides. But somehow the legend of Saddam as a great warrior remained intact.
We were taken as journalists by the Iraqis to an area which they claim to be in control of, where they were actually subjected to a severe attack by the Iranians, counter-attack. And then we were rushed into a bunker because the shelling and the rockets were quite heavy. And in the bunker, Saddam Hussein actually was there holding a telephone and directing the battle, which again is something that Stalin and Hitler used to do. He doesn't have much of a military background. But once he's actually in the bunker, instead of actually taking a back seat like Prime Minister would do, for example, and let the generals or the colonel in charge run the battle, he was insisting on running the battle, and it was actually going wrong.
By now, Saddam's reputation was preceding him.
My first meeting with Saddam Hussein was in '87, and after I finished my training as a double of Uday, I was really shaken because what I was hearing about the president. Just when I met him, he was so soft, nice, complete different picture of what was passing to the Iraqi people. And he joked with me, he laughed with me, and he said to me, Allah gave me 2 sons and you are the 3rd one. Please ask for anything you want, just don't make me angry.